What's the future of forward-facing sonar looking like in tournament angling, and will bans affect local tournaments in the future? Are pro anglers intentionally cheating, or do the rules need to be changed? Does this bait really work? Is it worth your hard-earned money? Is your current fishing line going to cost you that next trophy bass? And finally, what does Marketplace have to offer us today? All of that and more on this episode of The Last Cast with Jordan. Okay, everybody, so thank you for tuning in to The Last Cast, brought to you by the biggest bait and tackle store in West Virginia, Ohio River Outdoors, located just outside of Parkersburg on Emerson Avenue. If you haven't been there yet, folks, make sure you go check it out. I promise you it's 100% worth the trip, and by the only group of attorneys that I trusted whenever it came to my VA claim, Jan Dill's Attorney at Law. If you're a veteran fighting to get the benefits that you deserve from the VA, make sure you call the attorneys that won't take no for an answer. Call Jan Dills today. Okay, folks, so that's it for all the advertisements you're going to have to hear from me today. That doesn't mean you won't see a logo or two pop up throughout the podcast, but I promise you I won't be preaching any more advertisements to you as we go on. So, welcome to The Last Cast. I really appreciate y'all tuning in. The format's changed a little bit from the first few episodes I did last year, so just to let you guys know, this is just a longer version of the one that I've been putting on Facebook and TikTok, where I dive more into the topics that I discussed. Take a little bit slower, go more into detail, show you where I got some of the resources from. If you enjoy any of my content, or if you're watching this podcast, please make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. Okay, so first on the agenda, and one of the things I brought up, I guess it was the first thing I brought up in my new show that I'm doing on Facebook. What is the future of forward-facing sonar, and should we expect to see bans in local tournaments? Well, where I came up with this is, if you look, industries like Bass or organizations like Bass and MLF have already made moves towards putting some restrictions on this. And they're even bringing it down into the feeder series. As you can see on the screen here, the Opens this coming year will have a forward-facing sonar ban on every other tournament. And I would assume that's going to go into the qualifiers as well. They haven't posted where those are going to be at yet, so they haven't posted this beside it. And I'm sure if I read into it enough, you could find that it's probably going to have a forward-facing sonar banned on every other tournament as well. But like I said, you've also seen the pro circuit start to do it. Bass themselves, the elites, they're going to have tournaments without forward-facing sonar. MLF, they have, every tournament now, it's every other round, I think, or something like that. Or I think even moving into this year, they're making it more strict. I think I read something about that actually whenever I was looking this up, to where this upcoming year they're going to have to pick what round they want to use forward-facing sonar on, which, I think's fine. I'm not against forward-facing sonar. I have it. I think people should be allowed to choose what they want. But I do think that it makes the sport less interesting for spectators to watch and to get more people involved whenever somebody's staring at a screen all day, whenever that's what you're filming. And at the end of the day, it's really important to our industry to have viewership and to maintain sponsorship, because without any of that, this industry doesn't survive. People can't be pro fishermen for a living if we don't have people tuning in, if we don't have people, endorsing the sponsors. If the sponsors aren't getting any kind of outreach, obviously they're not going to be willing to pay to sponsor. So I think we do have to give in to whatever makes it more interesting for the fans. And also I think it makes it more interesting myself. Again, I don't think that like local tournaments should ban it, because if you buy it for your boat, it's not like most of us are endorsed by electronics companies to where you put all that money into it just to take it off for a tournament, because every tournament's banning it. But I do think it's going to come down to personal preference, where eventually you do see some local tournament directors want to host tournaments where forward-facing sonar is not allowed. Now, I don't know exactly how they'd enforce that, other than checking the boats beforehand and making sure that you don't have a transducer on your boat. But again, I guess people could keep one on their boat and put it on after they get away. It would be really challenging without doing polygraphs in every small tournament to make sure people aren't actually using it. So it might not be as feasible as I think. But again, I do think that that's coming down the pipeline, and I'm curious to hear what your all's take is on that. Do you even like forward-facing sonar? What's your thoughts on them being able to use it in the pro circuits? I know that you hear people say, they're real pros, they shouldn't need forward-facing sonar. But at the end of the day, again, our industry is all about pushing products. So, that's how we maintain sponsorships. We don't have people paying to come watch us fish like you do at football games and NASCAR events and stuff like that. So, I think that we have to allow it in order to keep these electronic companies sponsoring us, because that is their big product right now. That's where they're making most of their money. So they want it pushed out in front of the fans. If somebody does, like, if let's say if Bass does a complete elimination of forward-facing sonar, somebody's going to pick that stick up and run with it, and it's going to hurt the Bass organization. Same with MLF, any of those organizations. The NPFLs, again, they have a complete restriction on it, but I don't think they have the highest viewership either. I don't think top tier talent is there. I know that there's good fishermen there, so don't come at me with it. I'm saying that they're bad fishermen, but you don't have big names like Jacob Wheeler and Dustin Connell. And then I know some of the elite guys are going over there and fishing some of their tournaments now if they don't have entry fees for the Bass Elites. But still, at the end of the day, MLF and Bass are the two bigger series that you can follow. They pay the most, I believe. That's where some of your bigger names are. And even they haven't done a full band on it. I'm not going to say that I disagree with NPFLs. I think it does. I think that they have a more entertaining sport to watch with a complete band. I think it makes it more interesting. And I like the variety. Variety is never a bad thing. In any industry, whenever you have variety and competition among businesses, it always makes the end product better for the user. So I'm glad to see it. And again, let me know what you all think in the comments. I'm going to get a drink real quick. Brought to you by Blue Rock. Oh, sorry. I said I wouldn't say anything else. Sorry. I was trying to be funny, but I promised you guys I wouldn't have any more advertisements. So, next on the agenda, are pros intentionally cheating, or do the rules need change? So, it's pretty obvious where I came up with this one from. There was several pros this year that were disqualified, and I think all of them, except for maybe one or two of them, out of the 5 or 6 across all the different pro circuits, they were all in regards to the no information or the you can't receive information rule from non-competitors, or other people, which I think is a good rule. I don't think that pros should be hounding people for information or buying information. I don't think they should be buying waypoints, because at the end of the day, they are the professionals. They're the ones that should know how to do this better than everybody else. They're the ones that, that's why we watch them. That's why we want to learn from them, because they're the guys that can go to a body of water that they haven't been to and break it apart in a couple of days and find fish, just like we want to do whenever we go on fishing trips. But I also think that with it being the 21st century and all the access we have to videos like this one here, YouTube, and the amount of information that you can get freely without having to approach people, I think that the rules needed to be updated to where that wasn't an issue. And I think that's what the issue came down to be. So, and I think that for a couple of different reasons. So, all of the anglers said that this wasn't intentional. They didn't mean to do this. They weren't trying to cheat. Scott Martin said he wasn't trying to cheat. There was another one, Queen. He said he wasn't, it wasn't intentional with him. And I'd like to believe them. And I would say with Bass, especially, as you can see here, updating their rules, I would say it's actually safe to side with the side of the anglers and say that they weren't intentionally trying to cheat. Is that to say that, they weren't pushing the envelope? Obviously people push the envelope, just like in every other sport. You always hear people pushing the envelope, and it gets labeled as cheating, but there's a difference between outright cheating and somebody pushing the envelope like in NASCAR, stuff like that. That's what I think these guys were doing. Do I think it's right? No, but, I don't think they're the same as a group of guys that put lead weights down a fish. Obviously, I don't think that they were doing anything intentionally wrong or harmful, and I'm glad to hear that they're updating the rules. So let's dive into this and see, a little bit about what's in the rules. Another good thing about this rule update that makes me feel good about it, is the APC, the Angler Board of Professionals, which is a group of anglers elected by their peers that helps represent, their side with Bass on everything, to where they can make rules together and stuff to keep the series more entertaining and fair for both sides, I guess. So they were on the side of this. This was part of their doing as well. So I feel really good about this because, obviously the anglers themselves wanted it. And again, I don't think this new rule is not going to push cheating or stuff like that. But Bass has announced an update to its no information rule that will apply to the Progressive Bassmaster Elite Series, Bass Pro Shops Bassmaster Classic, presented by Under Armour, Nitro Bassmaster Elite Qualifiers, presented by Bass Pro Shops, and the St. Croix Bassmaster Opens in 2026. And right here it says, developed in collaboration with the Association of Bass Professionals, ABP. Sorry, I think I said that wrong a little bit ago. And John Cruz is one of the guys on this board, so I like John Cruz. I've met him once. He seems like a really down to earth guy, a really nice guy, and I think he really does want what's better for the sport. He's a really big advocate for conservation and for us doing things to not hurt the nature of the wildlife, or hurt what we cherish so much, the fish. So I think with him being on board with this, it's probably going to be a pretty good rule. But essentially what I've gathered out of this rule update is it's going to mostly come down to the 30-day off-limits period. They're still not allowed to buy information. They're still not allowed to buy waypoints. But it makes it easier. It makes it to where, watching a YouTube video is not going to get them disqualified. And I think they're allowed to use these bodies of water up until the 28-day off-limits period. So that will be nice, if you live near a lake. If it's going to be on the schedule, I don't see why an angler should be off limits to it all year, especially if it's their home lake and they want to take their family out to it, because we all know that the water changes a lot from day to day, especially certain times of year. You're not going to go out there, early spring and fish, let's say 30 days or whatever on this body of water, and then go back in the summer and have any kind of, the patterns aren't going to be the same. Can you side scan and find stuff? Yeah, but I mean, home field advantage, I guess, would be a good way to look at it. I think this is a good move forward, especially with all the anglers that we had get DQ'd this year. I don't think that many guys would intentionally try to cheat. You know what I mean? And I think that was a good sign that maybe it was time for a rules change. And obviously, Bassmaster agreed with that, and that's why they came up with this rule. I think it'll be good. I think it'll be good for the future of the sport. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Because again, this could be controversial to some people. But yeah, let's keep on moving to the third topic. The tumbleweed, dice, fuzzy, whatever you want to call it. Does this bait actually work? And, I haven't really used it myself. I did buy a couple this year, but I never broke them out and tried them hardcore to give you a definite answer for if they worked for me or not. But with the reviews that pop up, and this is just an AI overview, but AI is really good, honestly, if you're trying to sort out a lot of information quickly, because it can scour the whole web and pull up an average of all the reviews. But with all the research that I've done on this topic, it seems like a really good bait. See, as you can see on the screen here, it has overwhelmingly positive reviews, and it's really unique. I will give it that. I think even there was a pro that won an elite tournament. Yeah, Michael Neal, he won a tournament with it last year. So, yeah, I think it's a really good bait. Personally, I want to try it this year. With the reviews being as good as they are, I think it'll be a good one to invest your money in. And I know there's a lot of different options out there. There's some that cost $20, some that cost $10. Like the Strike King Tumbleweed, I think, is one of the more affordable options. You don't have to buy the most expensive one to know if they're going to work or not. If Strike King's making it, I'm sure that's a really good bait. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to be giving them a try. And I'll let you guys know. I'll let you know where I find with them. But with the reviews being so positive about them in both hot weather, cold weather, anytime that you really have to go down to a finesse bite, I think that it would be a good bait to try. And what it all comes down to, again, by what I've read about this, the reason that bass go after this bait so much and why it's so effective is because whenever bass are fry, whenever they're still really young, there's a microorganism that's similar to this that they feed off of, and this bait, with mimicking that, causes an internal reaction whenever they see it. Something apparently that can't be turned off, and that's why the bass are striking it. So there is some science behind the madness with this crazy looking thing. Again, I'm going to try it. If you guys have, let me know. I'm really curious to hear what your reviews are on this. If you guys have tried it, I'm really curious what kind of success you've had with it. How do you rig it up? But right here and by what I've seen, the most common way people rig it up is a drop shot. I'm not real sure how you'd wacky rig one, to be honest with you. By looking at this, I don't know. A wacky rig, thinking of a Senko hanging there with a hoop on it. It's kind of weird to think that you could do that with this. But I guess, you could just put a similar hoop on it. And to me, that's not really a wacky rig, though. It's just throwing this thing. Anyways, let me know. Let me know if you guys have used this. I'm really curious. They are interesting. Definitely one of the craziest looking baits that I've ever seen. If people weren't winning with it, I'd say this is some kind of crazy con just to prove that bass fishermen will buy anything as long as somebody tells them it catches fish. But we have proof. There are people catching fish with it, and Michael Neal won a tournament with it. So let's give it a shot. And let's move on to the next topic. And by the way, I did take notes so that I would try not to forget anything. If this is a little rough, it's the first episode. I'll try to get it a little bit smoother moving forward. But let's move on to number 4. Is that cheap fishing line going to cost you your next trophy bass? Well, honestly, if you're using cheaper fluorocarbon, it's a two-parted question. Is it going to cost you your next bass because it breaks off? No. According to the reviews, again, on the internet, it's not more likely to break, but it will cost you those finesse bites. So if you're throwing something like a spinner bait or a moving bait, something like that, and you're trying to save money, a cheaper fluorocarbon it is probably beneficial. But if you're going to a finesse tactic and you need to feel more, everything, you need to feel all the subtle bites, and when you're moving over rocks and through brush piles and stuff like that, when you're really trying to fill the bait, I think it is worth the money to buy a more expensive fluorocarbon. Me personally, I'm a cigar guy. Whenever it comes to trying to save money, Cigar Red Label's a really good option. It's like $12 a spool, and I use it for all my spinner baits, really anything that moves except for crankbaits. Crankbaits and topwater. With topwater, I like to stick to monofilament just because it doesn't sink, or it doesn't sink as much. And the crankbaits, like square bill crankbaits, I like to use the more expensive fluorocarbon, the Cigar and Vizex, because it's more sensitive, and I just like to feel whenever my crankbait hits bottom. I like to be able to feel it come over rocks and stuff like that. And whenever it comes to deep diving crankbaits, most of the time I throw straight braid. Again, for the same reason, I like the added sensitivity, and it's moving so the fish aren't going to see the braid. That came from David Dudley himself, and he has won a lot of tournaments, so don't come at me saying the straight braid on a deep diving crankbait sounds crazy. Trust me, if you haven't tried it, it works. But outside of those baits, if I'm throwing a wacky rig or an eco rig or anything like that, or a drop shot, I always use Invis-X, and I always use tungsten, and that's just because I like the sensitivity. I like to be able to feel when my bait hits bottom. I like to feel what it's coming through, and I believe that. I think that a more expensive fluorocarbon does have added sensitivity to it that you're not going to get with cheaper fluorocarbon. Even the Cigar Red Label, even though it's the same brand as the Invis-X, the Red Label is cheaper for an option, and I don't have issues with the fish breaking off. I don't think I've ever broken off a fish with Red Label from where it wasn't because I haven't retied. It was never because the line couldn't handle it, and honestly, it can handle a lot of nicks too. That is some really tough line, and so is the Invis-X. I mean, it's really good stuff. There's times I go down to 6-pound test with it, and still, I've boat flipped. I wouldn't boat flip like a 5-pounder with it or anything like that, but I've boat flipped 2s and 3s with 6 and 8-pound test and got it in the boat. So yeah, if you're trying to save money, keep it to the moving baits and spend a little bit more money with your finesse baits. I don't think you'll be disappointed because you're ultimately going to catch a few more fish. And honestly, I think it's more than a few more fish. Really, whenever it comes down to that finesse bite, and every bite counts, those fish can bite so light sometimes that if you don't have sensitive equipment, you're not going to feel it. I've had bites that felt like I was pulling out of a rock, just like out of a bed between a couple of rocks, or maybe pulling over some brush. And if I didn't have, sensitive equipment and sensitive line, I don't think I would have felt them. So if you're trying to save money, again, keep it to the moving baits where you're going to get reaction bites, and don't be scared to spend a little bit of more money on the fluorocarbon you use for the finesse bite. So now let's move on to the next topic. What's on the agenda How will opening up our lakes to keeping bass affect the lakes near you? So I don't know how many of you know this or how you feel about it, but for those of you that don't know, Elk Fork, North Bend, O'Brien, and Woodrum have all opened up to a 6 fish bass limit with a slot in it to where you can only keep one over 16 inches. Oh, excuse me. You can only keep one over 16 inches. So I don't personally think it's bad. I am 100% for people feeding themselves and their families, through the wildlife that we have around us. I'm a really big advocate for that. As long as you actually eat and use what you harvest. But also with what I've read, and again, we're going to AI here, but as long as it's managed correctly, it should improve the growth of larger fish. It should improve the population because, by what I've read, and there was an article that came out this year actually, which a lot of people I think still don't believe, but the big thing they're saying now is that bass don't grow based off of genetics. They grow based off of their availability to food and how much they can eat. And if you have a bunch of smaller bass, 12-inch bass, taking up the food and all everything around them, it makes it harder for the fish that can grow bigger to grow bigger. So, yeah, if this is done correctly and people don't push the envelope and take several large bass out of there, I think that it could lead to seeing more big bags. Maybe you're not going to go to these lakes and catch 20 12-inch fish, but you might go there and catch 10 quality 2.5 3 pound, maybe even 4 pound fish. And I'm all for seeing bigger fish come to our waters if there's anything that we can do to make that happen. So I don't think it's going to be that bad. I honestly think, if you really want to worry about anything hurting the fish population, otters. Otters really take a deep toll into the fish population. They probably will do more damage than fishermen will. Because even though they're opening up to this, I still don't know a whole lot of bass fishermen that like to eat bass. I do. If I go to like Lake Erie or someplace like that, I will most definitely fillet bass and eat them. I think they're delicious. But, I don't do it around here because up until now, you couldn't really keep bass out of most of the waters that I fished. Like Stonewall you could, but I don't live real close to Stonewall. You can on the river, but I am not eating anything, and I mean anything that comes out of that river because I know people do, and I'm not convinced because I've never seen them at night that they don't glow in the dark after eating those fish. So I'm not eating any river fish, just not happening. I know that they say that there's certain amounts that you can eat, but if you got to put limits on stuff, not for me. I'm not going to push the envelope that far, especially whenever it comes to my health. So I don't think it's bad. But, if it's abused, it could be. And it could hurt the population of the bass. This was the first year they've done it. So, I live near North Bend, and I don't think the fishing was affected negatively. I don't fish North Bend a lot because of where I travel to fish and stuff like that. But I was still out there probably 7 or 8 times this year, and I thought it fished similar to how it always has. But if you're from any of these other lakes like Elk Fork, I'd really like to hear from Elk Fork or O'Brien, Woodrum, any of those lakes. If you think it's affected your fishing, your fish population in that lake negatively, let me know. I'd like to hear about it, or just let me know what your opinion is on this, because I know a lot of people don't like the idea of keeping bass, and that's fine. I completely understand, but me personally, I am not opposed to it, and I think this will be good for people if you want to keep something out of nature to eat and feed your family with. I don't see where we can tell people no on that, and it's here. So please follow the regulations. Don't get greedy with it. Don't try to take a bunch of large bass out of there. And maybe this will increase the population to where we have a healthier herd of fish and not just a bunch of little ones. Okay, so now let's move on to something else close to home. What is on the upcoming agenda for the West Virginia DNR Commission meeting? And again, this isn't going to be a real long conversation, but I don't think a whole lot, nothing that we would find concerning. There's never really anything concerning on these. But if you want to attend, you can attend online or in person. I think there's 6 different locations you can attend from. But here is what is on the agenda. The one thing I am curious about is the overview of black bears, or the overview of mange and black bears. I'm kind of curious to see. I guess I didn't realize that mange was a big issue in black bears. Actually, the first time I read that is something to do with black bear management. So I'm still kind of curious, even now knowing that it's mange in the black bears. I did not know that mange was a big issue in black bears. I do know that the black bear population is significantly higher than it was whenever I was younger. Whenever I was a kid, if somebody in our area would see a black bear, everybody knew about it. And it's not like we lived in a close neighborhood. We lived out in the sticks. But if somebody sighted a black bear, it was big news. Granny was calling everybody to tell them about it. And now people, I think, are honestly getting tired of it. They're very destructive. I get they're pretty to look at and stuff like that. Like at Stonewall this year, while I was pre-fishing for a Fishers and Men event, I seen a mama and her cub walking around, and it's a majestic sight to witness. It's awesome to watch. Watch these huge animals walk around. But just like anything else, there has to be management, and there's a lot of them coming out now. You hear people all the time getting their feeders wrecked and damage like that. I'd actually be more curious to see what the population of black bears is like compared to 10 years ago, more than I would be to see how much mange is in black bears. But apparently that's still an issue. But yeah, if you want to check this out, in-person locations for this are here. District 1 is Railroad Street in Farmington. District 2, Depot Street in Romney. They're having one at the Elkins Operations Center. District 3, Robert C. Byrd Drive in Beckley, headquarters in Charleston, and the closest one to where I'd be at would be Parkersburg. Or like I said, if you want to join online, they have options for that too. And honestly, I don't think it'd be bad for you to hop on there. As somebody who uses the wildlife around here that's part of conservation, I think maybe it's our due diligence to try to pay attention to stuff like this. Again, there's never anything like harmful in here, but it never hurts to pay attention and to be involved. So yeah, if you wanna join this online, there is availability for that, so make sure you check it out. And finally, it's time to move on to the Facebook Marketplace item of the episode. And here it is, folks, coming to a home near you, a Mothman concrete statue, because what's more West Virginian than the Mothman? The only thing that I think would make this cooler is if he was holding a thing of Mountain Dew and maybe had a pepperoni roll somewhere, maybe make his eyes red. But yeah, if you want a concrete Mothman statue, make sure you contact Jennifer there in Hurricane, and you can have it all for, unpainted for $95, and if you want it painted, $120, so maybe you could get the eyeballs made to look real creepy. Okay, so that is it for this episode of The Last Cast. Again, I really appreciate y'all tuning in, especially since I just reformatted this and we're trying something new. Let me know what you think. Give me some feedback in the comments. If you haven't yet, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you on the next episode.